Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the fourth session of the SSJS Bootcamp. And I welcome you to this series. If you haven't joined the first three sessions, they're available on the YouTube at the rate MC Learning Camp. So the first three sessions covered the overview of the SSJS and then different functions of the SSJS, like the data extension functions, the utility functions, date and time functions, and so on. So in this session, we're going to look at the Vue.js. This is something new. So Anthony is going to give an overview of the SSJS and also a deep dive into that. And in addition to these sessions, the SSJS regular sessions, which happen at 12 p.m. Every Thursday, every Wednesday, we do have hands-on sessions, which happen on Thursdays, 8 a.m. Eastern. So the hands-on session will be step-by-step guidance, and one of you can get a chance to be the builder. So those of you who do not have access to the MC org, we're going to provide you access to the MC org, and you are going to build those things. And one of us will be the guide for you to help you navigate and then copy the code and see how it works. So if you would like to volunteer to be the builder for the SSJS hands-on session, let me know. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Anthony. So I'm so honored. It's a good opportunity for us to learn from you. So I'm all so excited to see what in this session.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having me, JB. It's been something I know we've been trying to plan for quite a while to have, this content be presented. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity to share the session that I did and put together for this past year's Connections Conference. So it's about enhancing your Salesforce Marketing Cloud pages with JavaScript using specifically Vue.js. So my name is Tony Zupanzik. For anybody who might not know me, I am part of the Marketing Champions program. I'm a Salesforce Marketing Cloud developer at Avigate. I've been in the ecosystem now for around 6.5 years or so. I'm one of the co-founders of How to SFMC, and I've currently been a co-founder for Stasher.io, which is a backup and recovery app for Salesforce Marketing Cloud. So that's just a little high-level overview around who I am. So let's dive right in. So anybody that knows me knows that I do a lot of cloud page development, and it's kind of been my passion for the last handful of years. So first off, let's take a look at what a cloud page is. So within Salesforce Marketing Cloud, you have Web Studio and you have cloud pages. They are essentially a fairly simple, usually public-facing landing page built directly within Salesforce Marketing Cloud. But they can be a lot more than that. You have collections, you have pages where you can build out a multi-page experience, which is great, but a lot of times it can be hard to scale that. They can also be used for internal application development as long as you have the right security measures in place. But usually they are fairly simple implementations. They are very flexible. You can use HTML, client-side JavaScript, and where they are really flexible is when I had found out you can use pretty much any kind of modernized web standards on a cloud page. It's not simply limited to what you have access to in server-side JavaScript, which is a bit outdated, unfortunately. And because of the fact that they run within the Marketing Cloud ecosystem, they are fully rendered on, I believe, the server side, if I'm not mistaken. So you have access to AmpScript, you have access to server-side JavaScript, which really allows you to pull in your Marketing Cloud data right within the platform, right within the application itself, and use that in your landing page implementation or your internal application. So what is Vue.js and why bring Vue.js into your cloud page development? So if you are at all familiar with web development or web application development and have been around in it for the last couple of years, you'll be familiar with the great JavaScript framework wars between React, Vue.js, and there's a handful of other ones that are out there that are production level, enterprise level frameworks or libraries. The reason why, when I started exploring cloud page enhancements, the reason why I went toward Vue.js is because it's approachable. So it's a progressive JavaScript framework, which means it's built on top of HTML, CSS, and everything that you pretty much already know if you're familiar with this type of development. Vue.js is very approachable because it's very familiar. It's also reactive, and it's designed to be used with or without a build step. So what that means is in a development environment, you usually have a server like AWS or Google Cloud Platform where you run it in a build step and it serves your static files. Vue.js is built and developed so that it can be used both with that type of mentality as well as directly within your browser through the use of a content delivery network, which is really, really beneficial in a cloud page setting because you don't have that build step. It's versatile in that you can actually incrementally adapt it into your cloud page development. You can use as much or as little Vue.js as you need, which is why it kind of sits somewhere between that library definition where you can use it sparingly, or you can use it for your entire application as a fully featured framework. So it's very versatile in however you want to use it, and it makes sense for you and your team. So what are some of the benefits of using Vue.js? The first one is the template syntax. So I've mentioned that it's very similar and leans on a lot of the technologies that you already know. The template syntax is basically just an extension of HTML. So on the right, you'll see the screenshot where it has that template property, and a lot of it looks like your standard HTML, but you have some Vue.js specific syntax that uses that handlebar syntax. So getting started with writing HTML and the front end pieces for it, you can get up and running fairly quickly. It's reactive. So in vanilla JavaScript or jQuery, you have to do a lot of identifying changes and identifying handlers and things like that. Reactive in the sense that when you make a change directly to Vue.js's data model, it's going to update in the document object model within your browser, and your HTML is going to render and change dynamically based on that. You can use components with Vue.js. So another big benefit of this is you can refactor the way you think about building a landing page, building a web application, and build it out in smaller, isolated bits of code that you can reuse that are isolated. So you're not going to have one component making changes down the line to a different component unless you specifically tell it to do that. The last one is, again, that no build step. So Vue.js is designed specifically to that you can use it in the CDN, or you can use it with that build step. A lot of other frameworks out there are specifically for that server environment where you have to really lean on that build step. Now, there are other frameworks out there that don't rely on that are coming up that might be a better option for your development style. But Vue.js is, again, one of the ones that are the standards amongst enterprise level development, which is kind of why I leaned on Vue.js for that. So I had mentioned the components and changing the way that you see and you think about your landing page or your marketing cloud application development. So thinking modularly takes a complex landing page or a complex application and allows you to really break it down into bite-sized pieces and makes it a little bit more approachable. So each component that you craft in together, each component that you piece together for your application has its own specific purpose. Each component can be developed in a way that it's reusable, so you can pop it into any point in your application and pass in the data you need, and it should work as if you just copied and pasted that code directly in your page. If you strategize the way that you're developing and build out your components in a modular fashion, it can be really easy to add and remove components and features from your application, which can allow you to do some testing and do some feature flags within your application without having to refactor a whole structure. So it's easy to change and modify, what your application is able to really do, as long as you're strategizing for that. So let's take a look at what a typical Vue.js application might look like. And you can kind of see that like a lot of the HTML tags on there are very familiar to what you would normally see. You have your head tags, your div tags, your body tags, and your script tags. So again, that structure of your overall application is very approachable and very familiar to what you should be used to. Again, you have the script tag at the top that is your CDN import. So again, that's what really allows you to use a no build setup for your applications. You'll notice that top div container that has the ID of app. So that's going to be your container div. So what Vue.js is going to do is it's going to take everything that you tell it, take all your components and render it, and it's going to inject it directly into that container div. So everything is going to come together and be rendered there. If you look down in that script object, you have the app.js object. So Vue.js is compiled from its own set of properties and its own set of object structures. So that's what's going to be taken and put into that vue.create app to mount to your container div. So that's kind of where all that magic happens. And then within that is where your components are going to go, and all of your HTML is going to kind of come together to render out your page. So let's take a look at a real world example of what you can kind of build and how it is kind of structured for a cloud page application. So the project I've gone with is a fairly simple data extension search. And you're not going to see all of the code here, but all of the code is on a public GitHub repository that I'll share at the end. But this will give you a sense of how you can take something and break it down and what that data flow really starts to look like. So this is a simple search with a results display. We're going to go over working in modularized components. The way that I typically stretch things out is in code snippet content blocks, which you'll see in the repository. And this method of building uses asynchronous submission methods so that you can really build a page without having to go through refreshing the page to take an action within Salesforce Marketing Cloud. So in the screenshot, you have all of the code that is powering this data extension search if it was just built out on a page. And here it doesn't really look like a whole lot, but if you start to think about a full-on application or a more complex cloud page, you can imagine how this set of code can get fairly unwieldy and hard to maintain. So in my development mentality, I like to take my cloud page and make it as minimal as possible using structural HTML and all of the things that need to be directly in that cloud page. So we're going to take this, break it apart into modules, and the intent is to really make that cloud page asset as minimal as possible. So we're going to take it from something like this to something a little bit more streamlined, where it's maybe 25, 30 lines of code. We have our script imports. We have our HTML that's going to be rendered from our content block. And then our script tags will also be within a content block that gets pulled in. And the goal behind this, again, is to only update or publish the cloud page itself when absolutely necessary. And this also allows us to organize our code in a way that it's going to be a little bit more maintainable and split out by each component type. So let's take a look at the application itself, and let's see how we can break this down into smaller bite-sized pieces. So the first components we have are the app.js component, which is like the brains and the mission control of Vue.js. We'll have our app HTML, which is going to be that container div and how everything gets rendered into that. It's where we're going to register our components and set up our structural pieces of where our components sit. Now, if we take that and go inward a little bit, we have two more components. We have our search and we have our results. That search component is going to be responsible for that user input and executing that submission request, passing it up to our mission control or our app.js object. And then we're going to have our results component, which is going to be specifically for display. So it's going to take in data and it's going to iterate through the results and it's going to display those results. Next, we can go in a little bit further if we wanted to, and we can isolate that single data extension result object. So if we wanted to add specific properties or change the styling of it or whatever you need to do at that specific level, that change is going to take effect across every single instance of that single component. So let's dive into what those core components start to look like. On the app.js side, again, this is that mission control. This is the brains and like the real power of Vue.js, of where you're going to piece everything together. Now, this isn't everything. There's a lot of different properties and a lot of different things you can do within a Vue.js component, but what's listed here are kind of the key aspects of what you're going to be doing in Vue.js. You have your components where you are registering them within Vue.js. So that's going to tell Vue that these are Vue components. These are things that it needs to be aware of. The data function that is returning the object is essentially every single data point that you're going to need within your application. Now, you can have specific data points at the top parent level component as well as at the child level components. The way that I like to look at this is anything my application needs across multiple different components goes in the app.js component. Anything that is specific to a child component is going to sit there. Next down the line is the methods. So the methods are Vue.js's way of organizing any kind of JavaScript interaction that you need to have within your application at that specific level. So at that parent level, you might have anything that's going to interact with a code resource page or an external API. You might also have data transformations and data formatting at that level. Within the child components, you might have specific data transformations or anything else that you really need to massage or change that data for that specific component before you either send it up to your parent component or inject it into a different child component. On the other hand, you have the app HTML that has that container div. So if you'll notice, that container div is made up of just those two different child components that we talked about. So you're going to have that search container and you're going to have the search results. So you'll notice there's a couple different Vue.js syntax elements in here. So that @ symbol is passing data from your child component into your parent component. And that semicolon is passing data from your parent component down to your child component. So that's how your child components and parent components are able to kind of talk to each other and share data or actions between each other. So the next part of that is diving into the specific child component. So if you'll notice, a lot of the properties and a lot of the elements within your child component are very similar to those in your parent component. And again, they're just simple JavaScript objects. The main difference is you have that template literal string that's going to hold the user interface or what's displayed on your cloud page for that specific component in that template property. And as I mentioned before, your child components can both take data in from your parent component to action on them or render that data for a display component. And you could also pass that data up to your parent component. You'll notice there is a line in the middle of the screenshot that is the this dot $emit. That's how we're passing that data from our child component all the way up to our parent component. So the goal of, for me, my goal of child components usually is letting that app.js component do all your heavy lifting. So in this instance, the screenshot is showing the search component where it just has that single input. It has that submit button, and we're passing the input value up to make our API calls to our code resource page. So that's a lot of information. It's a lot of moving parts, and it's a lot of modularized pieces. So I find it helpful to take a look at it from a top-down perspective and really dig into where our data is going and how that data is being processed. So on this screenshot, we have our application on the one side and our code resource page on the other. So where it all starts from is that search component with the input. So the user would go in, put the information that they're looking for within the input, and click that submit button. That child component is going to emit or pass that data up to our app.js component, which has that submit search function. So once that submit search function takes in that data, might do whatever it needs to do to change the data before it goes to our code resource page, but it's going to push that data through an asynchronous JavaScript function to our code resource page. There, you're going to have your server-side JavaScript function, and imagine you have a get data extensions function that will make the request to the Marketing Cloud APIs, likely through server-side JavaScript or using WS Proxy. That's going to take the data and then pass it back to your app.js or your client-side JavaScript. From there, it's going to take it and pass it into your display component, which is then going to pass it down into your single search result component. So you can kind of see how that data goes full circle from the input to that main mission control app.js, all the way out to your code resource page and back down to your search results component. So that's Vue.js at a high level. And again, it's not a true deep dive. There's so much in the documentation to go over, but it's a kind of a why you might want to use it for a Marketing Cloud landing page. The other aspect of Vue.js and using modernized tools are the dev tools. So if you've ever done any sort of really complex development for Salesforce Marketing Cloud, you usually have a whole lot of console logs in your client-side JavaScript. You have a lot of debugging tools that you implement yourself. Vue.js comes with a Chrome and Firefox tool called the VueJS DevTools. And what's really powerful about it is you can actually visualize your data as it's being used within your application. And I found that using this makes troubleshooting my applications substantially easier because I can actually see what the data is at every point within my application and what actions are being taken on that. You're with this, you're able to actually track down problem components a lot easier because you're able to see, again, where that data is being passed down to. You can see if there's something off in a connection for a component. And then you can also see what events are taking place and the resulting actions. So with a submission event, you can see when you click that button, you're going to see a submission event come up and you'll be able to troubleshoot that event if need be. One of my favorite things is that you can actually test your variables directly in the browser. So if you are testing logic, if you're testing different rendering situations, you can actually go into the Vue.js DevTools, change the variable values right there and actually see what it's going to do with your application in real time. So it helps troubleshooting, it helps checking out logic, and you don't have to go all the way back to your data extension to change a value or change a scenario. You can do it right there in your browser. So what this kind of looks like is, this is a very basic example, but you can see that data extension search component is highlighted, and you can see the data property within that component. So within that, I have that data extension name. I can see that the form data object that I've set up is a reactive element. So it's going to change anytime there's been an update to the input. And then you can imagine if you have Boolean fields, if you have other data that's handling, again, that logic, you can see what it is and match the values up to your application to see and make sure that everything is being validated and everything works appropriately. So with that, Vue.js is something that should be considered with care, essentially. Where does it actually fit in your development cycle and when should it be used? So what I have found is that Vue.js really shines with those small to medium-sized applications. And when you're handling and keeping track of a lot of data, that's when Vue.js really shines, where you can actually get the most out of it and you have some level of complexity with your applications. Where you might not want to use it is when you hit that point in time in development where you start to say, this is becoming a little bit too much for maintaining within Salesforce Marketing Cloud. We might want to look at it in different technologies. So using an actual outside application system like AWS or Google Cloud Platform to actually host it. What I've found is the larger your application gets, the harder it is to really maintain. So Vue.js might seem like a one-size-fits-all solution, but it's really something that as you're approaching a project, you kind of want to figure out like what your project is going to build into and if it's really long for Salesforce Marketing Cloud. Because a lot of projects in a development mindset kind of really aren't. But yeah, anything that has some level of data tracking or data handling you need to maintain within that small to medium sized application level, Vue.js is a great choice for you. So thank you guys so much for joining today. I hope you guys have learned a little bit about Vue.js and consider using it for some of your projects. At the QR code is my link tree. So it has a link to the project repository for this demo. And it has all my social contacts and anything that I'm really associated with. If you have questions or want to chat more on this, I am on the Email Geek Slack channel. I am on the How to SFMC Slack channel. Always looking for good development conversations, and more than happy to help you troubleshoot. So yeah, thank you guys so much for joining. And
That
I'll
was
always
insightful. Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions, I'm more than happy to field any questions. I know we're kind of short on the presentation length. So I'm more than happy to take any questions around Vue.js or cloud page development that you guys might have.
So I don't see any questions. I have one question regarding the repository. I think you shared, this is the one for the repository, I believe. So is there a particular reason why you would use Vue.js instead of React?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for me, it's something that when I started using a modern framework to do cloud page development, the reason why I went for Vue.js, first off, was it was more approachable than React. When I was learning a modern JavaScript framework, Vue.js was substantially easier to learn, and it was more approachable. It is very true that you're able to utilize React with the CDN, and I've done some level of testing with that. In my experience, using React on a cloud page comes with more hurdles than it was really worth. And again, that was through a very small set of testing for that. But the way that the JSX is rendered, the way that it handles within a page itself, it seemed like there was more hurdles to get up and running with it than Vue.js. It seemed a little bit more straightforward using Vue to get up and running and maintaining it. Now, that's not to say that you can't use React. I've seen cloud pages built with React, and it's really about what you're comfortable with. I know, I want to say later on this month or next month, JB, you have Ivan Razin, I believe is his last name, that he's using Alpine.js, he's exploring that as well. So I would highly recommend, if you're interested in using a more modernized way of developing for Marketing Cloud, check out his session as well. I've not had a chance to use Alpine too much, but it seems like a very straightforward and powerful way to develop for Marketing Cloud as well. So that it's just a personal preference at that point, to be perfectly honest.
That helps. Yeah.
Is there any? What's up?
That helps, Tony. And also the Alpine JS session by Ivan is going to be next week, Wednesday, 5 p.m. I have one more question. I think this is the basic one. Difference between the code snippet code blocks or the HTML code blocks?
So both of those should, in my opinion, render and do the same thing. The reason why I use the code snippet code blocks is because those are the only code blocks, from my understanding, that don't have any additional wrapping that goes around it. So I like being able to control exactly what code is going to be used in my application, in my cloud pages, or my emails. So when I'm doing custom code stored in a content block and content builder, I always default to code snippet content blocks because they're not going to add any HTML wrapping or any kind of additional code to the block itself. I can't remember what exactly the HTML code blocks wrap it in, but I recall there being some sort of tags that get wrapped around the HTML content blocks. But I don't think that they would be any hindrance to like the rendering itself, unless you're using it for housing JavaScript code. Then I can see it potentially having an issue because it's going to wrap it in HTML tags rather than just leaving it as a text output. So can we use Vue.js in email or just in a landing page? It is just in a landing page. So just in cloud pages, because of the fact that it needs that document object model. It's a web framework. It's not an email framework. So there's no way that you're going to be able to reach out to the CDN, pull in the library for Vue.js, and then render. And it's really not necessarily needed for an email specifically. It's more for handling that web application data, web application scenarios that you would find on a cloud page. But yeah, no, that's a great question.
Thanks, Tony. And I don't see any other questions.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much. I'm so glad that you guys enjoyed the content.
Thank you very much, Tony. So we will look for more the repository. So everyone take this as a homework. Check out these repository and try to do some hands-on with this one. So any doubts, any questions, post them in the SSJS challenge channel, Slack channel. And then we are running a challenge on the Slack. So whatever session you are attending, you try to replicate that in your instance and then show us how it's working for you. So you will be entered for that, considered for the swag. With that, I think we can call it a wrap. Tony, anything else you want to add?
No, I think that's it. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast presenting this. I appreciate it.
It's our pleasure, Tony, and thank you very much for sharing all this information. We look to learn more in the next session on the Alpine.js as well. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks all.